start with any questions or feelings. How is everyone doing, just to check in? It's a lot of information.
Sleeping.
Did you say sleeping?
Sleepy.
You better get some more cookies. Yes. Maybe I'll talk close to it.
There we go.
I do not like it.
Actually, put it around. There you go.
I'll get this right up in your mouth.
It's probably not the microphone, it's more me, because I'm
You have to remember,
Do you get used to it?
Oh, yeah.
Break into song.
just remember, you're talking to a bunch of old people who are already hearing it, so.
Wait a minute.
That's better.
Yeah, good job.
Oh my God. I do want to say something that was brought up during the break, which was the issue of cutting and what that means as far as suicidality. You can never say for sure that it's not a suicidal behavior, but the literature now is not looking at cutting as a suicidal behavior. People that are suicidal can cut, but cutting is in a different category. It's more like a substance use issue, because they're doing it not to die, they're doing it to relieve pain. And there's a neurological effect. When you cut, you have an endorphin effect that's similar to an opiate. And so the risk there is that the cutting, it gets really deep. So there is a risk, and sometimes people can die, but their intent is not to die. Their intent is to relieve pain. So is there any questions on that? It needs to be taken seriously, of course. But it's not necessarily a warning sign for suicide.
I worked in a group home with teenagers, and that's something that you see a lot. Basically, you're told to look at it as being like a bad coping mechanism. So it's like burning, snapping, like of rubber bands is really common, another one, but it is just, you're told to look at it, obviously take it seriously, because there's risk of infection, like she said, going too deep, but it's basically a bad coping mechanism. It's like drinking drugs.
She was taught to look at it like a bad coping mechanism, and that is exactly true. Like drinking or doing drugs.
So before you start on the how to deal with after suicide, I just had one question. Say you know somebody who is struggling in that area, and their pattern is to start drinking more. You know, like they're not supposed to be drinking, but say they start drinking. And if you encounter them, say buying alcohol or something, where's that fine line? Like, how do you say what's going on? Like, why are you buying alcohol, or, you know, whatever they're doing, where you're just getting in their business, you know, like, because I think we struggle with that a lot, where like, that's not my business, you know, I know they're in trouble, but that's not my business.
Yeah, and it is a fine line. It's not exactly active suicide behavior, really, but you kind of know, because you're personal, that it's a slippery slope. I don't know. I mean, it's just trusting your connection with them, and that it's enough. And it has to be enough, you know. And I mean, I would rather get in someone's personal business and offend them in that way than not, and they die by suicide. But it takes courage and bravery, and it's hard. But they'll get over it. I don't know, did that help at all? Mm-hmm. There's a lot of gray area here. I was telling someone that at the break, that I can give you a lot of technical information here, but when it really comes down to it, every case is different, and you have to trust your heart and trust other people, and not get caught up exactly on what they say. Sometimes the words are hard, like I said at the very beginning, emotions are not bad or good, and you just have to go through them, and sometimes people might say really strong things when they're going through emotions. That might be scary, But always ask. You can't go wrong asking.
Well, maybe what you could say to them is just what you said. I would rather offend you
Yes.
than have you not be here.
Yeah. She said, in case you guys couldn't hear that, maybe what I just said is I'd rather offend you than have you not here. You can qualify it by saying, hey, I noticed this, but sorry if you're offended, but I need to make sure. You'll appreciate that.
Could I share a story?
Yes.
I came from up on the High Line, and there was a family up there, a husband and a wife, and they had 3 boys, I believe. And I believe that the husband had been unfaithful to his wife, and they separated. So the mom was living in a house with the 3 boys, and the dad had visitation. And he came to the house one night, and the mom answered the door, and I think maybe he was going to take the boys. So they all came running. They were excited to see their dad. And he pulled out a gun and he shot himself in front of his children and his wife. And if somebody had been bold enough to say, if they'd run across him, if they had known and they were bold enough to say, think of how they could have saved the damage to those kids. And how do you deal with that? It was hard as a community to deal with that, just to wrap your head around the visual of that even. And so that's my question, I guess. How do you help the families?
Well, your story reminded me of a couple things that I maybe didn't cover in the warning sign and risks, which is if there's a loss, which includes the loss of a family. Like I don't know if that's what was happening in that situation where there was a divorce and maybe he was using and she didn't want him to be around the kids or something. That's a high risk category. So pay attention to people in your life that have recently gone through a divorce or a death. We did talk about that a little bit. Or the loss of a job, huge. The loss of a house, huge. Any other losses that I can think of? Ranches. Loss of cows. Loss of health, loss of health, yes, huge. Any of those losses can put someone in that really high risk category. Without faith, it's hard to know how to, the how. How do you help, and I'll share some information here, but there are a lot of unknowns that just are. Like I said before, even if he was here and could explain it to them, he wouldn't probably be able to. So it's impossible for us to come up with the why. I'm gonna just make sure that I have covered all these. A huge thing, if you talk about it, you're not gonna make it happen. Just ingrain that in your brain. You're not gonna give anyone an idea. I'm just gonna say that again. And the most common method is guns, not overdose. I think people think overdose. I don't know, maybe a raise a hand. How many? That doesn't matter, but it is guns, so be careful about guns. And there's no socioeconomic difference. Rich people, poor people. There's not, you can't just be like, oh, that was them, they or whatever. There's no indicator in that area. Although sometimes people that do struggle with, paying rent and stuff, they just have more stress, so they're, okay. So suicide is a different kind of death. It's unlike any other death. When you experience the loss of someone that dies by suicide, there's no other death like this. I think mainly because a lot of times if someone dies by cancer, we don't say it's my fault. If I would have loved them more, called them, so that's the huge one here, is that we take a lot on when it comes to a death by suicide. all these questions of, did I miss it? What did I miss? What should I have done? And that doesn't come with most other devs. We can even know kind of practically that we didn't do anything, but we still carry that piece of guilt with us. Also because of stigma. It's embarrassing. This is like Doreen, or maybe my mom talked about, do you see it in the obituaries? I say, put it out there. Speak the word, say it, because by doing that, it helps other people who are struggling feel not so ashamed about what they're struggling. So the silence surrounding it is so huge.
In obituaries, they used to, at the very end, they put family chooses not to disclose, it would be like, oh, suicide. So instead of family chooses not to disclose manner of death, they might as well just put suicide.
Yeah, because, I mean, that's one thing we can do as a society, practically speaking, is just talk about it more and be real about it. Everyone's wondering and questioning anyways. By talking about it more, it reduces some of the stigma attached to it. So that's why death by suicide is different when it's someone you know. It's a different kind of mourning. It's a different way to talk about it. It's you have to kind of feel like you keep a secret about it.
In Great Falls, there was a young man that committed suicide, and his parents really pushed that issue
Yes.
because they were trying to help others. And I believe that they formed a support group type of thing. And the hospice at Benefice was having a group grief thing for suicide with families.
I like that. Another thing that makes a suicide, there's some literature that would call I would say probably I can guess that almost everyone in here has been affected by suicide. Is that, whether really closely or more distantly. And some literature calls you suicide survivors. I use the survivor in the other attempt, someone that attempts and doesn't complete, but I like thinking about the people that are left behind as survivors, because that's kind of what it's like. The family members and the loved ones, you are suicide survivors, and it's not easy. I talked a little bit before about the emotion of anger that goes along with it, and then we feel guilty, so we're mad. Why? And then, well, they're dead, and you're not really supposed to be mad, so there's this very crazy thing that goes on internally. And I say, embrace the anger. You're on the wave. You have to. You cannot deny it. You'll get stuck there. And all other emotions that go with it. It's not always just anger. There's a lot. So like this says, for us, the person we lost is also the murderer of the person we lost. So yeah, there's anger, yes. And another thing is sometimes there's relief. And this is just true. Because if you know someone and you love them, and they have struggled so much, and you put a lot of resources into them, and that emotion is ignored, straight up ignored, because there's a lot of shame attached to that. And there's no place for shame in this ever. Ever. There's no way to do it wrong or right, nothing. It just is. And you can feel relief. That's okay. It doesn't mean you don't love them. It just means that you're human. So.
Seems to me that little children, if it's a parent with children at home, that they would be, I know in a divorce, they all blame themselves. And I suspect the suicide would be.
Yes. He talked about children at home blaming themselves, and everyone does. Children, not, and that's very true. So if you are supporting a family that has experienced that, definitely know that that's there. And even though you can tell them, It's not your fault. It's still there. And even they will say, I know it's not my fault. It's still there. So this disconnection piece, because the death is so eclipsed by the way that it's harder sometimes, or we feel like we don't deserve to have good memories of them, or they're just kind of pushed aside. You know, again, this is a different kind of death than by cancer or an accident or anything. And those deaths are hard to heal from. And this is just added to that, you know. All the things that's hard for normal death, plus it's harder sometimes to access those good memories because we don't like difficult things, and we think, you know, I talk a lot about our culture thinks suicide is so bad and evil and stigmatized, and so our brains, when we go there, kind of cloud the good memories. So it's harder to remember the good things sometimes, and then that makes us feel disconnected from the person we lost. Man, and it's like this piece of, did they love me? Did they care about me? Did they even care about me? You know, why would they do that if they cared about me? Here are some myths surrounding this. And hopefully this will help accepting some of the process. It's my fault. It's my fault, or it's someone else's fault. We always like to do that. It's the doctor's fault, it's the teacher's fault. If I would have, and truly the only person who bears the responsibility of it is the person themselves. That is the truth. And they are also a victim. You know, so it can be both. Where a lot of times we have a hard time with these things, we think black or white, yes or, you know, good or bad, and sometimes this stuff is right in the middle. And it's really hard, our systems don't know what to do with that they were a victim and they did something they shouldn't have done, right? Both of those can be true, and that's okay. But you have to practice that being okay within your system. If I'd managed to stop it, they would have been okay. So this is another myth. Like, if I would have just called them, well, maybe you would have called him and they still would have died by suicide 2 weeks later. You know, this is something you cannot carry. You just cannot. It has to be an unknown. It is an unknown. I have no way of this, so this is the truth. I have no way of knowing what would have happened if the events had played out differently. Many people go on to complete suicide even after interventions. So the person I lost is horrible for having done this. This is a myth. This is definitely a myth rooted in our belief system surrounding suicide from forever ago, like forever ago. I took a class on this a long time ago, and she traced it back to like